Hello and welcome to Ideagen TV's 17 Days of Sustainability. Today we are honored and excited to welcome IBM's Energy, Environment, and Utility Strategy and Sustainability Leader, Elle Carberry, as she is going to moderate a fantastic panel today on the future of climate action. Elle, how are you?
Hi, nice to see you. Thank you for having us.
Excellent, nice to see you too. You have a fantastic panel conversation ahead of you, and we're very excited to meet the rest of your panelists. So with that, I will turn it over to you and let you dive right into your discussion.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Today is in honor of SDG 13, the future of climate and climate action. So our topic today is what's science got to do with it? And while science has been under attack, thankfully, other responses are rising fast in defense and in relation to the transition to a low-carbon economy. There are initiatives like the Science-Based Targets Initiative. Some nearly 1,000 companies are taking science-based climate action. And today we're going to look at one company, IBM, and how it's placed in focus on science in the climate action domain. And we're going to talk to three experts, one from IBM Research, where they take more of a 5-year view, and two from our client-facing teams, where they're taking a here and now set of actions, one from our utility industry and one from our climate, sustainability, and transition advisory services. So now I'd like to introduce the panelists, and they'll each introduce themselves. If you could welcome them now into the group. Great. All right, Kathryn, could I ask you to kick us off and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Elle. I'm Kathryn Guarini. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of IBM Research, and I lead an initiative we call Impact Science, where we apply advanced science and technology to address some of the world's most pressing problems and challenges, including the future of health, the future of work, and the future of climate.
Great. All right, Marie, can you say hello?
Hi, Elle. Hi, and hi, everybody. My name's Dr. Murray Simpson. I'm the global lead for sustainability, climate, and transition at IBM, bringing together all of our different assets across the company for client-facing engagements around climate risk analytics, around sustainability, the journey to net zero, and also about focusing on climate strategy and design for our clients across all sectors, across all markets.
Great. And Neil, can you say hello?
Sure, thanks, Elle. I'm Neil Gerber. I'm also in the Global Energy, Environment, Utilities team at IBM, focused on new energy, blockchain, and the new grid edge kind of solutions that are coming out. And my role today is going to be to try to translate some of the research discussions we have into what's going on with the energy transition and with the electrification movement that's happening within the energy systems globally.
Right. Okay. So since our theme today is science, and then we'll apply that to three topics, but we'd like to kick off with Kathryn to tell us a little bit about, since she sits in an overall IBM operational role for research, tell us about the importance and urgency of science and guided by IBM's values in addressing our climate crisis.
Sure. I think this year there's a particular urgency around science. Science matters now more than ever. And it's our point of view that it will play a defining role in determining the well-being and prosperity of people today and far into the future. It's critical that we enable global action in response to our most complex challenges, whether that's in addressing the COVID-19 pandemic or addressing climate change. Science plays an essential role in identifying sustainable solutions to these challenges. And we need solutions now more than ever. And in particular, we're excited about how we apply some of the advanced technologies to accelerating or scaling the scientific method. Because for decades, we've really relied on a version of the scientific method of posing questions, studying past work, generating hypothesis, testing and iterating. This rigorous process really is steeped in years of discipline and success. And for the first time in our history, we have technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and hybrid cloud that can supercharge the scientific method. And together we believe that there's an opportunity to massively speed up the discovery process, which we all know is something we very much need to address some of these very challenging problems.
Great. So we're going to take on 3 topics where we're going to apply science. So we're going to first talk about advanced material discovery. And maybe I go again back to you, Kathryn, since you're working on the 5-year innovation cycle. As we've learned so much from COVID-19 and the urgency of the scientific discovery, could we use some of the same urgency to apply science to addressing the challenges of climate crisis?
Yeah, we believe so. We every year issue a set of predictions. We call it the IBM 5 and 5, where we try to convey how some breakthroughs in science can positively impact and change some aspect of our lives. We've been doing this for 14 years, and these predictions are meaningful and can really translate to practical implementations, and we see how this is really making a difference. This year, our 5 and 5 focuses on the essential theme of supercharging the discovery of materials that will enable our sustainable future. And in line with the United Nations global call for action, its sustainable development goals, we're working on enabling this accelerated discovery of new materials that will address significant worldwide challenges, like materials that can capture carbon dioxide from the air and transform it into something useful, more effective fertilizer, safer and more environmentally friendly batteries, and many more. And each of these challenges has a common opportunity to use our technology to accelerate the process of information ingestion, to create a more complete knowledge base, to be able to use AI to simulate quantum computing, to augment, and finally automated testing to get to answers faster. And in particular, in the area of carbon capture, there's no doubt that efficient, low-cost materials that are intelligently designed for carbon dioxide capture before these emissions get into the atmosphere, that we absolutely desperately need more effective materials there, given that 82% of greenhouse gas emissions are carbon dioxide, and that only a small fraction of those produced from power generation are actually captured today. We see that the race towards more efficient carbon capture materials are critical to addressing this challenge of a changing climate.
Yeah. So Neil, given you come from the utility sector, how could these advances in these areas impact the energy system?
Yeah, so it's interesting, Elle. In some ways, the goals of both carbon capture utilization and storage, or CCUS, and more efficient, affordable batteries are the same in the power generation space. They're both going after the idea of producing zero carbon electricity efficiently through a stable, resilient grid. So in the case of CCUS, that means being able to stick with our existing large fleet of fossil plants that the utilities know very well how to use to control the grid, and to provide zero carbon energy from those means is hugely important. This lets them continue with the traditional ways they've maintained grid reliability and adequacy, and we sort of can keep using all the lessons we've learned over the last 100 years. In the case of battery storage in the power generation space, coupled with renewables, they sort of allow what are called hybrid plants, renewables plus batteries, to act like fossil plants to some degree by being able to respond to the grid and provide some of the services that centralized fossil plants today provide, by storing the excess renewable energy when it's not needed and being able to put it back to the grid when it is. So in some ways, these two are not necessarily competing, but both acting in the same direction in terms of what the electricity system needs in order to get to the goals that more and more countries, governments, and companies are setting for themselves. Now, of course, batteries play a key role in other parts, like electrification of industries, for fuel switching, for road transport, and other things. So they have a larger role than just for electricity generation. And of course, CCUS has applications in industrial processes, the creation of what's called blue hydrogen in the cement industry and steel and many other areas. But in the power gen space, they're very similar in the objective they're going after. Now, currently, fossil fuels have a strong advantage in terms of long-term storage of fuel. If you think of a battery as sort of storing the fuel from renewables, you can see that there's an advantage currently to the liquid fuel world, especially for longer-term storage issues. So CCUS, will be necessary. In addition, of course, there's very strong economic and political pressures to continue to use fossil fuels. Some countries are extremely dependent on them. They own the resource. There's a lot of other drivers to keep fossil fuels in the mix for the foreseeable future. So it's really a race to cost effectiveness, scale, and resilience. And if you look at today, what's being built today, going forward, renewables plus batteries, this hybrid plant that I talked about, are winning in terms of new construction. But that's still a very small percentage of all the generation globally. Fossil fuel still powers over 60% of global electricity generation. So having a breakthrough in the CCUS space is seen by many as an absolutely essential component to fully decarbonize the grid.
Yeah. So Murray, you cover a range of sectors and even dealing with some clients who are doing some pretty advanced things in the area of carbon emissions elimination even. Can you talk about some of those learnings?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things, Al, is that there is an inextricable link between science and industry, science and the private sector now, which is really important. And over the sort of 25 years or so I've been working in sustainability and climate, I've seen a coming together of academia, science, research, and the private sector in this particular space, and I think that's absolutely critical. And for us, when we're addressing the challenges that climate change is throwing up against us, and carbon elimination is one of the things that companies, for example, like Unilever, are particularly interested in. So, we've been working in carbon reduction, carbon measurement, carbon management, energy efficiency for many, many years at IBM, both internally and externally with clients. And Unilever, as an example, have been making great strides in that area, as have many other companies. And now a company that is far-sighted, like Unilever, are looking at carbon elimination rather than just reduction. And by that, what we're talking about is actually using different energies. So, for example, not just carbon capture, but actually things like hydrogen and other energies around renewables, of course. But we have to look at a whole energy mix when we're looking at carbon elimination. And so, as I say, there are different companies doing different things. But another example is companies like Reckitt Benckiser, which are looking at factory for the future, and how different companies look at manufacturing, and how factories in all sectors are working to eliminate carbon from the energy mix, so that they can look to the future with some surety and try to reach those aims and ambitions that have been made and that you'll hear every day now from a range of different large corporations, that they will meet net zero by 2050 or 2030 or 2040. And what we're trying to do really is to work with those clients, work with those big corporations and governments and across industries to collaborate and co-create an environment that where net zero actually means something, and it's not just empty words. What we want is transparency. That's vital, and that's something that IBM have been very clear about right from the beginning, and for many, many years, over the 50 years of having an environmental policy. So that kind of commitment is what we want to see going forward. But what's interesting is, if we go and look at other sectors like the financial services sector, absolutely critical for us as a planet, us as a society, to be able to reach net zero and turn around the juggernaut that is happening at the moment in terms of climate impacts as a result of climate change. If the financial services sector has a huge role to play, the market and finance and the influence that can have. So we're listening to and working with financial institutions who are making commitments, not just around their own operations in terms of reducing or eliminating carbon, but also where they're working with their own clients to invest in products and invest in businesses that are taking on board that carbon elimination mantle. So, we're really working across all kinds of sectors, and that also includes, of course, industrial sectors. Yeah, the industrial sector. The industrial sector, petrochem, chemical, petroleum, industrial products, they're one of the sectors that need our help the most, and that we all need to work together to assist in addressing the carbon problem. And carbon elimination, as I say, is one of those fundamental things that we need to be aiming at, not just carbon reduction. And I think we do see that across multiple sectors.
Yeah, it's encouraging. Thank you. Let's talk about another topic where science plays a role, and that's in the realm of modeling, resiliency, and optimization. And some of you have already touched upon those topics. Let's go back to you, Kathryn, if I may, and hear what you think about the impact of research and science in these areas to addressing the climate crisis.
Yeah, I agree, Elle, that the topics of modeling, resiliency, and optimization are really critical to better understand the impacts of a changing climate and to prioritize the actions that can make a meaningful difference. We're working on advanced impact and risk assessments using climate predictions to create resiliency tools for enterprises and supply chains. And in particular, the topic of supply chains, greenhouse gas emissions continue to grow. And at the same time, the supply chains are being impacted by climate-related extreme events. Artificial intelligence and various optimization tools can reduce pain points across the supply chain, such as supplier selection, green inventory and assortment, sustainable order management, and more. And we really have a vision for intelligent, self-correcting, climate-smart supply chains that enable the supply chain carbon footprint optimization and at the same time resiliency against climate extremes.
Yeah. Hey, Murray, let's go back to you for a minute then. As you think about those financial institutions and let's say their long supply chains, their impact on markets, what is it that they want to know through the modeling of climate risk management, and why now are they getting focused? What's driving them?
Yes, Elle, I mean, just to echo some of the things that Kathryn was saying there, modeling is absolutely key. And we're all familiar with the adage, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And that is obviously true. But the point is, they are useful. And when we're talking about models, what's really pleasing is that we're working very closely with IBM Research to provide solutions for our clients. And so let's take an example when we're looking at climate model ensembles. So climate models consist of huge amounts of data, and these are created by government institutions, research institutions, academics all around the world, and they're brought together as an ensemble, and they're used by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they're used by the UN, they're used by lots and lots of different organizations around the world. They are the international standard. So climate model ensembles, they're the best thing we've got to know what we're looking at as far as climate change. And they are proving to be pretty accurate, to be honest. We can see around the world what's happening in different geographies, in different environments, in different countries, to different societies every day, all the time. And those climate model ensembles are critical. What we're doing with partners, with some of our alliance partners, we're working to bring econometric models together with those climate model ensembles. So econometric modeling coupled with climate modeling and data from clients is enabling us to be able to see what the climate-related financial risk of particular assets may be going forward, and also, what the quantification of those risks is by dollars, by a dollar amount. So we're looking at, what is the highest quantifiable risk for a particular asset, for a portfolio, for a company, for a region. And by that, we're able to not only report against investor demands, regulations that are coming over the horizon. In fact, they're in place in many geographies, many countries, many legislations at the moment. But we're also able to identify trends and provide insights to clients so they can make decisions going forward. So that modeling element is critical. And that is the same as well when we're talking about the journey to net zero, about modeling what's happening in an ecosystem for a business, so that we can see from an environmental management approach, up from a carbon accounting approach, what is happening, so that we can assess performance management as well as measurement and intervention going forward. But models are critical.
Yeah. And Neil, what about the energy sector? You mentioned resiliency. So how are some of these scientific innovations impacting the world of resiliency that's somehow core to the day-to-day of the utility?
You're on mute.
You're on mute. Yeah.
Was told to do. There we go. Sorry. Okay. There's a couple of areas in the electrical energy system where I think complex modeling, scenario planning, and optimization are really going to be important. So the first is that the grid structure is changing fundamentally, and we've been talking about this for the last decade, but it's really happening and accelerating now. So the grid was traditionally a fairly linear, one-way kind of a process where the utility had control of most of the things that were happening, and essentially they created the services and the energy, and it got delivered to customers. But that topography is changing rapidly now, more towards what you might think of like a mesh network, where customers can provide services back to the grid, where big battery systems are being applied at the low voltage part of the grid, which is unusual, and new markets are emerging. And so, this new model, architected correctly, should result in better use of grid assets, should increase resilience, should lower cost, and should, of course, give us greener power. And those are all great goals. And so that's one area that's going to require a bit of complexity added to the modeling side. And I'll talk about that in a second. The second piece is climate adaptation, which has been touched on a bit. Utilities infrastructure has to make it through large-scale events, hurricanes, floods, fires. We're seeing what's happening when it doesn't in many parts of the world these days. So climate adaptation is becoming more and more important. And to talk, back to what Murray was talking about in terms of climate modeling and really trying to understand risk, where we need to invest, really understanding in a much more fine-grained way where the real risks are, and being able to make better bets in terms of where our investment, which utilities get money from ratepayers, or where our investment goes into making the grid harder in areas where it needs to be, and understanding what the climate adaptation risks are going to be. So that's another area. So both those areas require a lot more complex modeling and simulation and scenario analysis than we've used in the past. For example, the way the grid operates, we've been able to pretty much use historical data and trends in the past. The past was pretty much like, or the future was pretty much like the past. We could use that to guide our investments and how we operated and ran things. In the future, though, in the near future, already happening, we have to leverage advanced modeling, forecasting, optimization that has sophistication to be able to manage this much more complex network that's going to have regimes that we're not used to, that we haven't done before. We haven't had models where there's 100,000 EVs plugging in and out of the grid at all times of the day, outside the utility's control. That has to be understood really well if we expect to keep the resilience and the reliability and the affordability that we all expect from our electricity network. And an example of that, there's some early projects, especially in Europe, one called Ideagen, for example, the point towards the future where a big portion of the services that the grid is going to require could come from distributed energy resources, or DERs, which are, think of electric vehicles or a home or a business with solar plus a battery, where those entities will start to provide more and more services. And typically it'll be through a market construct. So there'll be a very complicated, multi-nodal set of nested markets in a complex electric system that has to balance at all times. And that has to be understood. Infrastructure has to be planned around that, so that it gets really complicated really fast. And that's going to require some of the breakthroughs in the ability to model very complex systems at speed and at scale that Kathryn and the team would be working on. But you can imagine a future grid where there's millions of these devices.
Yeah.
There's also utility scale plants. There's equipment that's there today. All has to work together. There has to be a planned and prescribed aspect to it, and then there's a market-based aspect. All working together at a whole bunch of different time frames, including real time. That's going to have to all run to make sure we keep our lights on, at the level of carbon intensity that we want to get to, which is zero at some point. So this future is clearly going to require a lot more capability in the modeling and simulation world than we've been applying today.
Yeah, great. Let's take on another angle on this question of science. And I think many of us talk about this as the decade of action, right? This 2020, 2030 decade. And so what are the other ways we can close the loop faster between innovations and implementations? The three of you represent exactly, the ends of innovation to implementation. So what are other ways we can close these loops to apply these innovations as fast as possible and at scale as much as possible? And again, maybe I go back to you, Kathryn. We heard you talking about the role of something called open science. Could you help us understand what that means, and how do that or other kinds of things accelerate this gap closing between innovation and implementation?
Yeah, I think that we very much believe in collaborative ecosystems, and even the point that Neil was just making around the complexity and all the different parties that need to co-create together. It just drives home the importance of sharing data and having a shared hybrid cloud platform on which the various organizations and parties, stakeholders in our broad ecosystem can join forces, right? The hybrid cloud platform enabling an IT infrastructure that spans on-premise and off, public and private, and enables a much higher degree of collaboration and co-creation. It's just essential going forward. In fact, we call these communities of discovery, where we bring together technical experts, thought leaders, really new models of public-private partnerships that are all joining forces around a common purpose to accelerate outcomes. The kind of problems that we're talking about today are just too vast for any one individual or organization to solve on their own.
Yeah. Hey, Murray, you were talking before about the bringing together the world of econometrics and climate science. How do these different scientific worlds come together, and what are some of the opportunities and challenges that you see from the client side when you try to integrate and bring together, and how do we get the different science domains to be ever closer working together? Murray, you're on mute.
Thanks very much. So I think one of the key things here is bringing together not just individual organizations and not just individuals. It's actually about bringing together a number of key parts of society, and technology, policy, finance, and academia. So by those things we can think about research through academia, of course. We can think about governments through policy. We can think about the private sector in terms of all kinds of different technology that comes out of different parts of the private sector. and of course with finance, we've got the markets, as I mentioned before, how important that is. But those four things, technology, policy, research, and finance, are absolutely key to being able to drive change. And there's one initiative that we've talked about before in the UK. It's actually an international centre for AI, energy, and climate. That there's a group of organisations who are encouraging and lobbying government to put funding into to establish in the UK. And as you know, UK is hosting COP26. It would have been in November this year. It's been postponed to November next year. I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I'm an optimist, and I believe that yes, okay, it would have been great to have the COP this year, but let's have a COP next year that is going to make a real difference. We've got a chance to really build up momentum to something really important and seismic that can have which can have a huge impact around the world. There's been a considerable surge in commitment and interest from all parts of society around the world to address climate over the last couple of years. That's been going on for 15, 20 years, but we had a bit of a glitch, when the financial crash happened in 2008, and we obviously had a setback when we were on a real pathway of momentum with the pandemic hitting, of course, at the beginning of this year. However, the pandemic has, I believe, and I think you'll recognise this because it's been written about and talked about a lot, the fact that we are all experiencing a global phenomenon, a global challenge that has actually served to increase people's attention and businesses' attention on the global challenge of climate change and sustainability. So I really believe that if we can continue to bring together technology, finance, policy, academia, research, then we can make a real difference. And if we can do it under the auspices of an institution or a number of institutions around the world that come together with the private sector, then I think we can have a really long-lasting effect and start to make a real difference around the world.
Yeah, great. Hey, Neil, in the utility sector, you talked about the mesh networks, the multinodal networks. You talked about technology on the edge as well as kind of at the core of the utility. Tell us about some of the examples you see in the utility sector where open collaborations are driving the pace of what can now be implemented and achieved.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're seeing a movement in parts of the infrastructure world towards open collaboration. This is open source, open data, of course, open standards. It was just beginning to take hold in our sector, in the electricity sector. But if you look at IT, you look at telco, even automotive industries, there are, the energy industry starting to follow the lead of those industries. And entities such as Linux Foundation Energy and others are starting to apply this model to the development of the new capabilities that will be needed to build and operate this new grid model. It's interesting that utilities, in some sense, they're well suited to a collaborative model because they tend to not compete. They tend to have their monopoly areas in general. And so they've got this natural tendency to work together. And so it fits well with this new open model that other infrastructure industries are already well down the path towards. We're seeing, for example, and Kathryn mentioned this a bit, as grids start to interconnect more and more, more assets and devices are required. We're moving across country lines. If you look what's happening in Europe, there's a huge effort to link up transmission systems, for example, across Europe. That requires open, standardized data transfers and management to be efficient and effective. This is already happening, and the move towards an open way to manage that is really, understood now. And for a risk-averse industry, which would have looked at open source 10 years ago and said, I don't trust that, the entire cloud globally is run in open source. Most of the new telco is run in open source. half of the code in cars is open source. Open source is sort of standard now. So now is the opportunity for this industry to really pick up and say, this is the way we're going to get this done, because so much innovation has to occur. And that allows the integration of innovations from communities of discovery, startups, other industries, et cetera. The utility industry was really built to be stable, consistent, incremental. That's the way it's been built. We did it on purpose so that it was always there and always ready. This new paradigm is going to require a whole different model there. You need to maintain some aspects of that, but you need to bring much more innovation in. And these new open models are the way to do that.
Yeah.
The other thing that that's interesting here is how AI is going to play in this. You start to think about these more complex systems and how you manage them all. If we just look at, once again, these examples in Europe where aggregators are starting to get thousands of customers that they're pulling together the services from in order to provide that to the market in a 5-minute or even faster manner. In the future, there'll be more markets, there'll be more customers on the end. There's going to have to be AI and machine learning implemented in order to make that work. That's not going to be something humans can interact with. So there's going to be a big play for advanced AI in this marketplace too.
Mm-hmm.
Then from a broader perspective, primary energy, which electricity is one form of, the key form of, is such a key component of sustainability overall. There's also opportunities to leverage, these capabilities to look at open communities for energy models and data that can, sort of go outside of the utility space. At the end of the day, we have to move in parallel, not sequentially. We can't wait for one utility to figure it out and then pass it to their neighbor and then pass it to their neighbor. We need to have this opened up so that when innovations happen, they immediately go across the world and everybody moves together. We don't have time to go sequentially anymore in this industry.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, to close out, let me ask each of you, you're all three deep experts with huge amount of personal and professional commitment and passion in what you're doing. Can you just share one last thought to the audience, that inspires them that we can do this, so that people believe and we can all, each in our own realm, take action in some form? But just some closing comment about what you believe in, why you're here, inspire the audience on this day, October 2nd.
All right, I'll start. I think we're at an important juncture, right? We have the tools, we have the technology, we see the problems before us, and I believe that by adopting some of the advanced technologies in a new collaborative communities of discovery model, I believe we are poised to really tackle some of these longstanding challenges and make a meaningful difference. Where there is a will and the technology and the collaborations, we have a way.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Kathryn. Others, Neil or Murray, want to offer your thought, your inspiration to the audience?
Yeah, okay, I'll go next. Neil, do you want to go?
I can go if you want, either way.
Yeah, I think I've already started self-finish, as they say.
Right. Yeah.
I think one of the things, if I don't want to hark back to the pandemic. We hear about it all the time, every day, and so on. But I did my PhD at Oxford University, and I've always found Oxford. Yes, it's a very old institution. Yes, it has some really embedded and staid mannerisms, if an institution can have that. But it also is cutting edge. And I'm giving you an example. The reason I mention Oxford is because IBM and Oxford University and the UK government, and it could be any government, it could be any university, but you've got there a government and a revered institution and a well-established, one of the most respected private sector companies, been around for over 100 years, working together to come up with solution. They're working on the vaccine, for COVID, and they're making great strides, And yes, there are another 6 or maybe even a dozen centers around the world, and I'm sure plenty of other people would say they're further ahead. But we do know that nexus, that partnership is really taking a lead and making a real difference. And so I use that as an example, I think, of what's important to address the kind of challenges that we're talking about. The fact that a massive company like IBM are working together across the different divisions to address this issue of sustainability and climate, and the fact that an institution like Oxford and IBM and a government, the fifth richest government in the world, are working together. But this is what we need to see, with people in society all working together with a common goal and a common aim, and we're achieving something as a result of that. We're not going to be perfect. We're not going to do it immediately, but we just need to work together, and we'll get there. And that, that's what I love. So.
Yeah, great. Neil, you want to bring us home? Close us out?
Topic. So one is urgency, and I think that's what Marie was sort of getting to with COVID. This idea that merely we need to ramp up our view of urgency. We can do it. We're showing that we can have an urgent response to something when we need to. The second thing Kathryn talked about briefly, which is technology, that we don't have all the technology to get to zero net carbon yet. We have a lot of technology to get a long ways there today. And the other thing is, as humans, we just have difficulty with exponential growth, exponential curves. We don't understand them very well. But when we look at, we've got examples in solar, we're getting examples now in batteries, that once we get going in these technology areas, the rapidity at which we can improve things, it can be pretty awesome to behold. And things can change in a decade that we think couldn't possibly change that fast. So I think there's, if we can get the urgency ramped up, I think the other parts are in place. We're ready to meet this challenge.
Great. Well, you've given me a huge amount of encouragement and inspiration, and then what was a science discussion that we've begun has also evolved into the need for collaboration. And when there's a shared purpose, you know how organizations come together like nothing else. So science and collaboration might be the closing thought at the end of our panel today on climate action and what science got to do with it. Thank you so much, audience, for being with us today. And thank you, Kathryn and Marie and Neil. And we're all here to make a difference, and let's keep doing our best. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.